Hello, and welcome to Grade.com Talks With. Today, we're talking with Martin Fisher, co-founder and chief executive officer at KickStart International, a nonprofit social enterprise with a mission to lift millions of people out of poverty quickly, cost-effectively, and sustainably. And if you're new to our podcast, please press subscribe button either on YouTube or your podcast app, because today we're going to learn about an organization that is working to irrigate Africa to change the lives of millions of farmers and end poverty. Good morning, Martin. Welcome to Grade.com Talks With. We're excited to have you here.
Good morning. Great to be here. Thanks so much.
Wonderful. Could you please describe KickStart International for someone who is not familiar with your work?
Absolutely. So, as you've just heard from Kareem, the mission of KickStart is to enable millions of people in Sub-Saharan Africa to take a major step out of poverty. And the vast majority of the poor in Africa are farmers, and they live on a small plot of land and are sort of scraping their existence out of that. And that's 80% of the poor people. And so it turns out by far the best way for them to climb out of poverty is to move from rain-fed farming. They all plant at the same time. They all harvest at the same time. They compete with each other in the market. They get very low prices. And actually, about 40% of their produce rots in the field before it's eaten or sold. To move away from that to irrigated farming, because with irrigation, you can actually bring out crops throughout the year. You can grow high-value crops. You can harvest them multiple times. You can actually harvest every day with irrigation. And of course, in that long dry season, the off-market season, when the prices are high, so you can make a lot of money throughout the year, greatly increase your yields and your income as a result. So what we do is we promote very, very low-cost irrigation technologies, which we sell through private sector distributors, and we work with hundreds of partners to reach the farmers and educate the farmers about irrigation. They can buy these irrigation pumps and irrigate their farms with very small, very low-cost, mostly human-powered irrigation pumps that enable them to irrigate up to an acre or two of land and grow fruits and vegetables and sell them throughout the year. So that's what KickStart does.
Mm-hmm. The fact that you are spreading awareness and creating awareness about irrigation, and you are also building the tools to help those farmers in Africa is wonderful. Over the years, there have been millions of dollars of contributions to poor regions of Africa, and the impact of those contributions have not been significant. Why do you believe is the reason for that?
I think there's many, many reasons that aid has failed. One thing, I think a lot of aid doesn't really meet the individuals there as entrepreneurial beings who themselves can lift themselves out of poverty. Much of it is about handouts. It's about helping them with food or feeding them or giving them things. While we really believe that the people everywhere are the same, and just like us, they want to look after their family, they want to make money, and you give them an opportunity, which is all that we do, and they can do the rest. And so I used to work in a big development agency, and I did a lot of those things. I set up large rural water programs. I built a lot of primary schools. I built rural workshops where we gave away things to farmers. And really, most of those things didn't really work very well. And they weren't sustainable. And a few years later, you come back, you put in a nice well and it's clean water. Well, to begin with, the clean water itself doesn't really help much because by the time they get it home in a dirty bucket, it's dirty and they can't carry much home. But apart from that, a few years later, the pump breaks down and Africa's littered with literally hundreds of thousands of broken water pumps. While if you think about it, actually, every person in the world, their number one need is really one thing. Just like us, make a lot more money. If you make more money, you can clean your water. You can get water. You can get enough food to feed your family. You can send your kids to school. You can build a better house. So that's what we asked ourselves is how can millions make a lot more money? And not many aid agencies really ask that.
Mm-hmm. The fact that you mentioned that the aid that was provided, it was more of a one-time thing, and although it was reoccurring, but there wasn't a track record of creating sustainable way for the people who the aid was providing to, so they can do things on their own. And the fact that your organization is trying to address that issue and making sure those people can do it on their own is great. Could you please describe in detail how are you helping farmers, as you mentioned, to meet their needs of making money and sustain themselves?
Absolutely. So, as I said, it turns out that for millions of farmers, the best way for them to make a lot more money is to move from this rain-fed farming, where they all plant at the same time, harvest at the same time, sell into the crowded market, to this irrigated farming, where they can now plant crops throughout the year and harvest them throughout the year, get much higher prices because they're bringing them out in the long dry season when there's no other crops, what they call the hungry season in many places, because that's when the price of food goes up and there's very little food. But with irrigation, they can bring it out at that time. Now, it turns out in Sub-Saharan Africa, there's virtually no irrigation. If you look globally, 20% of farmland is irrigated, and it produces 40% of our food and 60% of the value of food. If you look across Asia, over 40% of farmland is already irrigated. In India, over 50% is already irrigated. If you look in Sub-Saharan Africa, only 4% of farmland is irrigated. And most of that's actually in South Africa and Madagascar and Sudan. So in most countries, it's only 2 or 3%. So literally, in the dry season, in the off season, there's no food. And so by helping farmers to make money at that time, there's an absolutely huge opportunity for millions and millions of them to completely change their lives. Now, farmers have never irrigated before. There's no history of irrigation. So they have to be convinced. They have to be trained. They have to be demonstrated to. So we have teams who get out there and we work with partners across Africa. We work with all the big development agencies, the small development agencies, the UN agencies and government agencies to reach the farmers and educate them about the fact that if they could irrigate, they could make more money. And then what we do is we design these very, very low-cost pumps, as I said, and I happen to have a few. This here is our new lowest-cost pump. It looks like a bicycle pump, but actually, it works a little bit differently. It's got a pivot here, so you actually use a rocking motion as you pull this handle up and down instead of like a bicycle pump. So it's very, very easy to operate. Now, this can pull water from a shallow well, a hand-dug shallow well, and many, many farmers in Sub-Saharan Africa, actually, if they just dig a hole in their farm, as little as 5 or 6 meters or even 2 or 3 meters, they will find water. They can now pull that water up through a hose pipe and push it out through a garden hose pipe, just like a garden hose, and grow these high-value fruits and vegetables with it. So what we do is we design these pumps, and we have a number of different models. We train manufacturers to produce them, and we sell them through a network of local retail shops, importers, distributors, and retail shops, so that local farmers can hear about them because we're educating them, and they can buy them, or they can work with development agencies to access them. Many agencies are giving farmers loans for these pumps now. And the farmers can get this pump and start irrigating and make a lot of money from their plot. And to date, we started in Kenya way back in 2000. And then we expanded from Kenya into Tanzania, and then into West Africa, and then into Southern Africa. And today we sell in 17 countries across Sub-Saharan Africa. We've sold over 350,000 of these pumps. And we do very careful impact monitoring, so that we visit families when they first buy a pump. We come back and visit them 18 months later, and we compare how they're doing. And what we see is, on average, over 75, 80% of these families take a major, major step out of poverty. And so overall, there's 1.3 million people now, including the families and the kids, who've taken a huge step out of poverty just from these pumps. And of course, on top of that, they're producing food. They're producing food throughout the year. They sell to their neighbors. They sell into the local village, into the local town. So creating food security as well. And with climate change, it's becoming even more challenging, of course, because with climate change, you now can't depend on the rain. Because with rain-fed farming, you wait for the rain, you plant, you wait for the harvest, you harvest. But if the rain doesn't come, you lose your crop. And that's happening more and more in Africa. But with irrigation, you don't care about the rain. You irrigate whether the rain comes or not. You get your crop throughout the year. So it also very much helps families to adapt to climate change and be very, very resilient in the face of climate change.
Mm-hmm. The statistics that you provided, that only 3% of the farming land is irrigated in Africa, is quite surprising and shocking, because in comparison to other regions of the world, you mentioned India, you mentioned other countries in Asia, which is 50%. So there is a lot of potential in Africa for Sub-Saharan African region for people to learn about irrigation and step up from the poverty. You indicated that at the moment you have helped and working together with private sector, with retailers, to provide over 1.3 million tools for those families in need. How do you, however, the population of Sub-Saharan region and the number of farmers is widely higher than those numbers. What do you see as some of the challenges that is in your way to reach more people in that region?
Absolutely, Kareem. It's taken us many years, right? Because we started in 2000 and we're 2021 and we've only reached 1.3 million people. And in that same period of time, Sub-Saharan Africa has grown by probably 50 million, 60 million people. So we're really losing ground here. And so the question is, what can we do now to really, really expand and greatly amplify the impacts? And as you've just repeated there, the potential is huge. There's so many farmers in Sub-Saharan Africa who can irrigate and can make more money. Something like 20% of the farmers actually have access to water right on their farm if they simply dig that shallow well. So the potential is huge. But there's no history of irrigation, so their parents didn't irrigate, their grandparents didn't irrigate, and it's actually a very big behavior change to move from rain-fed farming to irrigated farming. With rain-fed, you wait for the rain, you plant, you wait for the harvest, you harvest pretty much. With irrigation, you have to get up every morning, you have to get out there, you have to irrigate, you have to cultivate, you're growing new crops, you're selling every week. Very different. And behavior change is really the hardest thing. And so with no history of irrigation and a major behavior change that has to happen, you really need all the players to come on board in order to move the needle on this. And so we really have three pillars of what we do at KickStart. The first one is, yes, we're getting our pumps out there, and we're getting, our target is to get to 2 million people in the next 3 or 4 years. We're at 1.3 million people now, get to 2 million people. But even that's a drop in the bucket. And so to move further ahead, we need a number of things. We need new innovations, and innovations around a couple of things. One is new technology. So we're developing now a very, very low-cost solar pump, because not everybody is going to be using a manual pump. People want to step up to use a clean solar pump as well. So we're developing new innovations. On top of new innovations around technology, we're also innovating around new financing mechanisms for farmers to be able to access these pumps, to get education about the pumps. We're making digital education now, and this has been accelerated, of course, with COVID. And so we're innovating and teaching farmers and finding new ways to get farmers by partnering with literally hundreds. We partner with 350 organizations on the ground. So between them, they work with millions of farmers. So that's how we can spread the information out there. But on top of that, ultimately, what you have to do is you have to get the governments to back any new technology. You have to put in place smart promotion and smart subsidies. We want irrigation to be taught about in the universities and the schools when kids go to school. Right now, they're not. We want the agricultural extension workers to know about irrigation, to be able to teach the farmers about irrigation. So we're talking about something called systems change, where we really have to change the system. So the governments put in place the policies, they put in place the investments and the subsidies, which will enable the private sector to really come out and provide irrigation. So with our pumps getting out there, it's kind of a proof point that can be done. And okay, 2 million people will be nice, but it's still a drop in the bucket. The new innovations we're developing, and we're doing that in partnership also with the private sector and other people. So we're going to have the right tools that are affordable to these very, very poor farmers in Africa. But they can now take that step. And once they start with that very simple pump I just showed you, they can then graduate to, within 6 months, they can graduate to another pump. And within a year, they can even graduate to a solar pump because they make so much money. And so there's a bunch of advocacy we're doing to advocate for these policy changes for irrigation.
Mhm. I really like the fact that you mentioned three key issues. The one being the education, the awareness about these methods compared to rainforest methods, and there's not history of it. As many people in that part of the region, they inherit knowledge from the grandparents and from traditional resources. Yet we have to create awareness about this new tool that can help them to elevate their life. And second, you mentioned about technologies, the fact that there needs to be more technology in place, more innovation, and you are working on that is wonderful. However, the main and I believe the main issue and the issue that needs more support, you mentioned about the systems change. The government needs to take more action towards funding these kind of projects, educating people. You mentioned about universities. How do you see these changes that you mentioned taking place in the next 3 to 10 years coming?
Yeah, I mean, I think systems change is by far the biggest thing that any of us have to work on, right? It's just like with climate change. How are we going to change the system so we don't kill this planet? That's a huge systems change that has to happen, the way we generate electricity and everything else. And it's a similar thing here. We have to make a concerted effort and say, look, Africa needs to irrigate itself. It needs to feed itself. The population is growing very, very quickly. Right now, Africa imports a huge amount of food, and it's crazy. It's got beautiful, fertile land. Africa has a huge amount of renewable water resources that they can use. We're using less than 10%. So there's huge potential. As I said, very little bit of the land is irrigated. So it's a matter of putting some of these facts out there, getting them known by the major players, getting them known by the World Bank and the big players who actually end up funding the governments, of course, educating and working with the governments at the same time, and working with all the other major players who are working in Africa. And we've made a lot of progress on this. So now we find a lot of the big UN agencies are using our pumps in their programs. A lot of governments are starting to use our pumps in their programs, starting to talk about irrigation. And one of the things which is helping to drive this, I mentioned climate change, is because what's happening is for years, people have been saying it's all about rain-fed farming. You should plant when it rains and you increase your harvest. But now what they're discovering is the rains don't come. They fail or they flood and you wash it away. And so there's a growing awareness that actually with climate change, we have to do something differently. And irrigation is a big, big part of that solution. With COVID, we also have seen a big sort of mind shift because local food production with COVID is suddenly that much more important because we can no longer rely on imports because the ports are closed, because everything closed down this last year. And so we're actually seeing a bit of a mind shift take place because of climate change and because of COVID now accelerating it also. And so for the first time, really, we've been talking about it for many years, but for the first time in these last few years, we're really, especially this year, we're starting to see more and more people saying, look, for resilience, people need irrigation. Now, that's just the first step. We still have to have the proof points. We still need the technology. And then talking about it is one thing, putting money into it is the next. And without money, financing, and policies in place, it's not going to happen. But we are seeing some change there where a few of the governments are starting to see this and even putting in place some smart subsidies where if you buy a pump, you could maybe get a 50% discount on it. And in general, if you look at agriculture around the world, there's no place that's developed without some smart government subsidies. Now, you have to be careful with subsidies because they can become dependent and they can get in the way and they can mess up the private sector. On the other hand, things do need kickstarting in the beginning. And this really is where those smart policies and subsidies can come in, both in terms of the government policies around education so that people know about it, government policies around a subsidy if required, around reducing import duty on technologies, on solar technologies, on human powered technologies, on irrigation, hose pipes, on pumps, sprinklers. So there's a lot of work to do, but I do feel that we're making progress. And in the next 5 to 10 years, I think we will see a real shift towards promotion of smallholder irrigation for smallholder farmers in Africa. So I'm feeling optimistic.
It's great that the current atmosphere, current status quo is bringing more attention to alternatives, alternative solutions, the solutions that can be, as you mentioned, more cost effective. They can elevate much faster. And the fact that you're drawing attention to this issue of the World Bank and other UN agencies who fund the governments in Sub-Saharan Africa, and those governments are, and then they are providing subsidiaries and helping their people. You are building this chain of effect with the tools that you are creating, and I applaud you for your work. If someone would like to support your organization, how can they do that?
Well, the best is always to go to our website, and it's www.kickstart.org. So kickstart.org, one word. That would be fantastic. And thank you. And and we're working with partners for this catalyzing the change. Always working with partners. So thank you, Chris.
Wonderful. So the link to your website, to the website of KickStart International will be provided in the link in the description. And if you would like to partner with them, you can find all the immediate information on their website. Thank you so much, Martin. It was wonderful to get to know you and your organization. And we appreciate the work that you do.
Thank you, Kareem. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please press like and share button, because this will show the YouTube and other podcast algorithms that this conversation is important. We need more attention to the issue of irrigation in Sub-Saharan African region to help farmers to elevate their life and end poverty. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.